We continue now at the top of Daf Aleph and Mesechet Yevamos. This is Yevamos Daf 95a. The Gemara is in the middle of explaining the difference between achos isha. Let's say you have a situation of a man that is with the sister of his wife. So then the halach is that his wife is not prohibited to him. But on the other hand, let's say the person's wife would be with another man. So in that particular situation, we would say even if it's b'shogeg, so the wife is now not going to be allowed to her husband. And so the Gemara is in the middle of explaining the difference. Achos isha, when it comes to the isser of achos isha, divimezid lo asir midoraisa. So even if the person does it b'mezid, meaning even if the person is with the sister of his wife b'mezid on purpose, so it's not going to be asr on a doraisa level. There's no isser on a doraisa level for him to be with his wife. So b'shogeg, so if it happens by mistake, meaning to say he believed that his wife was dead, let's say, so lo gazru bar rabbanan. So in that case, the rabbanan are not going to make a gezeira again. Mashe ein kain, in the situation of the wife when she's with another man while she's married. Over there, b'mezid, it is asr midoraisa, and therefore b'shogeg there's going to be a gezeira midrabbanan. Rashi over here says, achos isha dafilu b'mezid, even b'mezid, ba'al achos, if a person has relations with his wife's sister, lo mitzra ishto aleh midoraisa, there's no isser doraisa to his wife, kediktani l'kamon, like it's going to say later on, hilkach b'shogeg v'chulu, therefore when it comes to b'shogeg, there's no gezeira midrabbanan. And the Gemara now says, Umenolan de lo asir. Now, how do we know that when it comes to achos isha b'mezid, there's no isser midoraisa? The Tanya, as we learned in the following brisa. The brisa says osa. The pasuk over here says osa. The pasuk is v'shochav ish osa shechva zera v'nela mein isha. It's talking about the situation of sota, of a woman who is with somebody else, who's not with her husband. And so we darsh in that pasuk her osa shchivasa osarta, meaning when it comes to her, when it comes to this kind of situation where a man is with a woman who's married, so then that prohibits her. But we darshan, according to the Tanakama, this brisa, that if the husband is with her sister, that does not prohibit her, that does not prohibit the wife. As Rashi over here says, Osa v'shachav ishosa, again, that's the pasuk of a man is with her. If a man is with the wife, so then that prohibits her to her husband, but that is not true if the husband is with the wife's sister. Sheyachol v'halo dinu, because I might have thought that it should be a kal v'chomer as follows. Uma b'mokom, sheba'al isser kal, if in a situation where a person comes on an isser which is a light isser, nesar ha'oser, so the one who creates the prohibition becomes prohibited. So mokom sheba'al isser chomer, a situation where you have an isser chomer, a stricter isser, and no certainly the one who's causing the prohibition should also be prohibited, and this is going to be explained later on. Rashi over here says, in other words, we need the pasuk of osa because you could have made a kal v'chomer to say that indeed the wife would be prohibited if the husband was with the sister. And what would the kal v'chomer have been? Again, like we said, mokom sheba al isser kal lekamon mukim la be'eshes ish. Later on, the Gemara is going to go through a few possibilities, but the Gemara is going to say that the isser kal we're talking about is actually Ish. It's talking about a situation of a married woman who's with another man. Now, why is Eshes Ish called an Isser Kal? She'ein ha'osra osra kol yamav. The reason why that is called an Isser Kal is because it's not osra forever. Sharei heter yesh beget Eshes Ish. There's a heter. She could go marry someone else if she receives a get. And so Rashi here continues and explains the Kal v'chomer. Nesar ha'osra. Again, that means to say that if a person comes on an Isser Kal, meaning if a person has relations with an Eshes Ish, so then the one who created the prohibition becomes prohibited, meaning Nesar ba'bala, her husband, is now osra to her. Ha'osra lachem, and he's the one that created the prohibition. By having the kiddushin with his wife, she's now forbidden for everybody, and if somebody does have relations with her, then the husband's prohibited. So makom shabal isser chamor, so a situation where a person has relations with something chamor, meaning can go in achos ishto, like the sister of his wife, that's considered chamor in this case. She'ishto oseres as achoso kol yameh, because a person's wife answers her sister as long as she's alive, that's why it's considered an isser chamor. There's no way to get out of it like you have by Eshes Ish, where there's such a thing as a get. So Einodin shenesar oser. So the one that created the prohibition should also become prohibited, meaning shetayasar ishto, meaning his wife who created the prohibition, she should be aser. Haoseres as achosa, she's the one that caused the prohibition to the sister. Lakach nemar osa. That's why it says osa, to say no, that is not the case, and instead we say that in a situation of achosisha, the wife is still permitted. But you could have had a kal v'chomer the other way. And the brisa continues. Amar Reb Yehuda says, Lo nechluku beishamai o beis Hillel beboal chamoso shaposel esishto. Shammai and Beis Hillel, they do not argue in a situation where a person has relations with his mother-in-law. Certainly everybody agrees that his wife is now disqualified. He cannot be with his wife any longer. Alman nechliku. Now, on what do Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, what do they disagree about? Beba'al achos ishto, in the case that we're discussing now, a person has relations with the sister of his wife. Shebeis Shammai omrim posel, because Beis Shammai say that in that case his wife is disqualified. He can no longer be with his wife. Beis Hillel omrim lo posel, and Beis Hillel say it is not disqualified. He is allowed to be with his wife. Rashi over here says, says, "B'val chamosa sheposel ishto olav ulakaman yolif lo mikra." That's going to be learned out from Sukkim. Shebei Shammai omer posel. In the case of the sister, Bei Shammai say posel mikal v'chomer kedamrinan v'osolo darshi. We're going to have the kal v'chomer that we said above, and they do not have the drasha of osa. And the Brisa continues. Amar Rabbi Yossi says, "Lo nechliku Beishamai Beisila b'Baal Achosishto." On the contrary, Beishamai and Beisila, they do not disagree by the case of Baal Achosishto, where he has relations with the sister of his wife, Shelo Posel Isishto. Because in that case, we say that the wife is not disqualified, as Rashi over here says, the Darshan Osa. Because everybody agrees you do make the drasha of Osa, and you say that in this case there's no disqualification to his wife. Alma nechliku. And what do they argue about? They argue about B'Baal Chamosa, where he has relations with his mother-in-law. Beishamai Omer Posel. Beishamai says that does cause a disqualification of his wife. Beis Hillel Omer Lo Posel, and Beis Hillel say that does not cause a disqualification. And Rashi over here says Beishamai Omer Posel the Darshinan Oso v'Eshen Kedel Kamon. This is going to be a drasha later on, learned out from Oso v'Eshen. And Rabbi Yossi now continues, because originally, before there's a kedushin, the man, the husband, was mutter to all women in the world. And before the kedushin, she was mutter to all men in the world. And Rashi over here says, Rabbi Yossi here is explaining his reasoning why there's no dispute when it comes to achosisha. If a man is with the sister of his wife, there's no argument, he's still permitted to his wife, and he's giving the explanation right now. And Rabbi Yossi here continues and says, again, originally he's mutter to all women, she's mutter to all men. Now Kidsha, now once there is a Kiddushin, so hu osra v'hi asarto, so he creates a prohibition on her, and she creates a prohibition on him. The Kiddushin means that they are now limited. Meruba isr sha'asra me isr sha'sarteyu. But the isr, the prohibition that he does on her, is more than the prohibition she gives to him. Shehu asra b'chol anashim sheba'olam, because he has prohibited her to all other men in the world. Once a woman is mikudeshes, she can't be with any other man. V'hilo asarteyu ela b'krovoseh, but she only prohibited him on her relatives. When a man is when a woman is mikudeshes to a man, so the man is allowed to be with other women. The only women he cannot be with is her relatives. So it's less of a prohibition on the husband. And so therefore, Rabbi Yossi says the following argument. V'alodinu, therefore it's logical. Umahu she'asr b'chol anoshim sheba'olam. If when it comes to him that he prohibited her on all men in the world, shagaga ba'asr la, so the halach is, let's say she would make a mistake and be with someone that was prohibited to her. Eino naseres b'mutter la, so if it's b'shogeg, that doesn't prohibit her to the one that she's mutter to, meaning she's not prohibited to her husband in such a case. So when it comes to her, shelo asarteyu ela b'krovoseh, she only prohibited him to her relatives. It was much less of a prohibition. So therefore, shagag ba'asr lo, so if he made a mistake on someone that's asr to him, let's say her sister, eino din shelo nasar lo b'mutter lo, certainly that should not create a prohibition on that which was mutter to him, meaning he would not be prohibited to his wife from that mistake. And Rabbi Yossi continues, V'zehadin l'shogeg. Now this whole argument works for shogeg. Let's say it was done by mistake. L'mezid minayin. How do we know it's true by mezid as well? Talmud Lomer, the pasuk says, again, the same pasuk, Osa, it says Osa shchivasa osarta, when it comes to her. So if she's with another man, that prohibits her. Ve'en shchivasa chosa osarta, but if the husband is with her sister, that is not going to prohibit her. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rabbi Ami, Amar Reish Lakish. Rabbi Ami says in the name of Reish Lakish, My time of Rabbi Yehuda. What is the reason of Rabbi Yehuda? Rashi over here says, My time of Rabbi Yehuda, do Amar Habal Chamoso Pasal Esishto. Again, Rabbi Yehuda said that if a person has relations with his mother-in-law, that disqualifies him from his wife. So what's the reason for that? Because the pasuk says, Bo'esh Yisrafu Osovi Esen. Again, that's talking about a situation where a person is with his mother-in-law, and it says that they both get sreifa, him and them. Now that doesn't make sense. We pointed this out earlier. Is the entire house going up b'sreifa, meaning his wife didn't do anything wrong. The original woman that he married was a permissible marriage. So why are they both getting sreifa? It should just be the mother-in-law. And so therefore we darshan as follows. If we can't apply it to sreifa, what it should mean is it means in terms of prohibition, meaning they're both affected, meaning he is disqualified from being with his wife once he is with his mother-in-law. That's what we learn out from this pasuk. And the Gemara continues, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. Rav Yehuda says in the name of Shmuel, Ein halacha k'Rav Yehuda. The halacha is not like Rav Yehuda. We do not prohibit him to his wife when he is with his mother-in-law. And the Gemara continues, Hahu da'avdi sur b'chamasi. There was a story like this. A person violated the prohibition with his mother-in-law. Asya Rav Yehuda nagde. Rav Yehuda brought him and he was going to give him lashes. Amar lei said to him, Lav da'amar Shmuel. If not for the fact that Shmuel said, Ein halacha k'Rav Yehuda, that the halacha is not like Rav Yehuda, Asrita halacha isur da'olam, I would have made your wife prohibited to you forever. In other words, when he brought him to punish him for violating this isser and to give him lashes for violating this isser of being with his mother-in-law, but he said, if not for the fact that the halacha was not like Rabbi Yehuda, meaning if the halacha was like Rabbi Yehuda, then you'd be prohibited forever from your wife. And the Gemara continues at the two dots. The Bryce above said that there was a potential kal v'chomer that you could have made, that just like by an Isser Kal, the one who creates the prohibition becomes prohibited, so too when it comes to an Isser Chomer, and that's referring to Achos Isha, so the wife who creates the prohibition on her sister, so she's going to become disqualified if her husband would have relations with her sister. That was a possible kal v'chomer, but the Pasuk tells us not to make that kal v'chomer, and that the wife is not disqualified. And so the Gemara now says, my Isser Kal, what is the Bryce referring to when it talks about the light Isser? And so the Gemara says, Amar Rav Chisda says, Machzer grushaso mishanisis. The case they're referring to is, let's say a person marries his grusha after she married someone in the interim. So a person divorces his wife, she marries someone else, so then there's a prohibition. He's not allowed to marry the woman that he divorced. So over there we make the kal v'chomer as follows. So ba'alehai asra le'adahai. The halacha is, if let's say again she has relations with somebody in the interim, so then that prohibits her to the husband. Now ba'aleh idach, and now let's say she goes back to her husband who she's not supposed to be with. So asra le'adahai. So then she would actually prohibit the person that she was with in the interim would now become prohibited, because that would be machzer grushaso in the other direction. And so therefore we're going to make the kal v'chomer as follows. We're going to say, just like in this situation where the one who created the prohibition becomes prohibited, meaning to say the person that she married in the interim created the prohibition to her husband, and then if she is with her husband, she actually becomes prohibited to that man. So therefore again we'll make a kal v'chomer. The same thing should be true by achos isha. The woman, the wife, should be disqualified. But the Gemara says you can't make that kal v'chomer, because ma'ala machzer grushaso. Because what is unique about machzer grushaso mishanisis? Number one, shekein nitma haguf. First, there's a impurification, there's a disqualification of the guf, and also v'isura barov, and also the isser applies by most people. It's not limited to a certain number of people. V'isura isser olam, and also that isser is an isser that lasts forever. And Rashi over here explains, ma'ala machzer tomer bebal achos ishto. All of these things are unique by machzer grushaso, but they're not true by achos ishto. Shetayasir ishto, because in that case the person was with his sister of his wife, and then you want to prohibit his wife, but shalom nitba gufa, there was nothing that was defiled by the wife itself. The person had relations with his wife's sister, and now you're trying to say that he's prohibited to his wife. V'yisra achos ishto eino isra olam, and furthermore, the yisra of achos ishto is not forever. Shemesa ishto mutter b'achos, because if his wife dies, he's going to be mutter by the sister. And again, those two things are not true by the case of machzer grushaso. By machzer grushaso, the wife herself is being defiled. She's with another man. And also that is an isser that lasts forever. She can never go back to her husband. And Rashi over here adds, Isser Barov lo garsin, and you should take out of the Gemara the words Isser Barov, because both of them are really not Isser Barov, meaning to say that by Achos Isha, she's only prohibited to her brother-in-law, she's only prohibited to her wife's husband, and then also by the case of Machzer Grushaso Mishanisis, so that Grushaso is only prohibited rather to her previous husband. And in any case, the Gemara continues now with another possibility in terms of what is the Isser Kal. Elam Reish Lakish, rather Reish Lakish says Yevama, the case that's considered the Isser Kal is the case of a Yevama. And so the Gemara clarifies, Yevama Laman, what are we talking about over here? Who is this Yevama to? Who's the prohibition to? Ilay Malacher, if you mean to say that we're talking about where the fact that the Yevama has to marry the Yavam, and she can't marry anybody else, and that's the Isser that's being violated. Uchid Rav Hamnuna, that would follow what Rav Hamnuna says. The Yamar Rav Hamnuna, because Rav Hamnuna said, Shomeres Yavam Shezinsa, Rav Hamnuna held that if a Shomeres Yavam, a woman who's awaiting Yibam, she goes and she has Nus, so Asura Li Yevama, so she's Asur to her brother-in-law. So in that case, you're going to say the same basic idea, that the Shomeres Yavam, when she goes ahead and she has a Zanus, so that causes her to be Asur, and it was the Yavam that created that Isser in the first place that didn't allow her to have Zanus. So in other words, she becomes Asur to the one who created the prohibition, and so then you'll say the Kal V'chomer for sure, by Achos Isha, the wife should also be prohibited to her husband. But again, the Gemara says, Mali Yevama, but what is unique by Yevama? Number one, Shekei Nitma Haguf, again, her actual body is defiled. In that case, it's the Shomeres Yavam herself who's going and having relations with another person. V'Isura Barov, and again, that Isser, that applies to most people, as Rashi over here says, to V'Isur Barov L'chol Adam, He Be'Isser. She's prohibited to everybody, the Shomeres Yavam, Ad Shelo Chaltza, before Chalitza. Tomar Ba'achos Isha, again, whereas by Achos Isha, that's not true. Sheina Asura, Ela Lazeh, she's only prohibited to this one individual, meaning to say, the Achos Isha, she's only prohibited to her sister's husband. And so the Gemara continues, Elo Yevama la'ach, and rather, what's Reish Lakish talking about? He's talking about a situation of the Yevama to the brothers. follows. What's the case? Avad b'maimer hai osra le dahai. The case would be, let's say one brother did a maimer with her, so that he creates a prohibition to the other brother. So now ba'ala idach, now that brother that's prohibited, if he has relations with her, so osra le dahai, so that creates a prohibition to the original one that did the maimer. So again, you see the same kind of idea. The one that created the prohibition becomes prohibited, and so then we should make a kal v'chomer. The same thing should be true. By achos isha, he should be prohibited to his original wife. But the Gemara continues, Ma'ir yashabah le'asheni. But if that's the case, why do you have to have a case where she has relations with the second brother? Afilu avad b'maimer, afilu avad b'nami maimer. Even if she just did a maimer with the second brother, that would create a prohibition with the original brother who did the maimer. So therefore, that's not a good example of a case. And so the Gemara says, no, halo kasha, that's not difficult. Rabbi Gamliel, because perhaps Reish Lakish over here is following Rabbi Gamliel's opinion. Do Amar ein maimer achar maimer, who says that a maimer after a maimer has no effect whatsoever, and therefore, when the second brother does a maimer, it's not going to take any effect, and that's why that would not be a good example of such a case. But still, the Gemara says, Ela afilu nasan laget va'afilu chalatzla. But there are other things that the second brother can do that can create a prohibition to the other brother who did the original maimer. Let's say that second brother gives a get, or let's say that second brother does a chalitza. So again, you don't have to have a case which is relations. And so the Gemara continues, Elamer Reb Yochanan, rather Reb Yochanan says, you know what the Yisur Kal is? The Yisur Kal is sota. It's a case of a situation of a sota. And the Gemara says again, sota laman. So who did the sota? Who did she have relations with? Rashi over here says, sota laman lami nivala de karila Yisur Kal. What was the relations that she had, which was a violation of an Yisur Kal, of a lenient Yisur? And so the Gemara says, Ilema lebal, if you're going to say maybe that it was talking about the husband, meaning ba'aleha bal, meaning if the husband had relations with her, so asra aleh the boel, so then he asks her to the boel, to the one that she committed the adultery with. But if that's the case, again, the same kind of question as before. Ma'ir yabala, what does it have to be that he had relations with her? Afilu nasan laget, even if he just gave her a get. Va'afilu amar einani mashkor, even if he just said, I'm not going to give you to drink the bitter waters, even those actions would make her prohibited to the adulterer. As Rashi over here says, so let's say she had relations with her husband after he already warned her, and she went in seclusion. At that point, she's prohibited him. In that case, so the bowl, she would be prohibited to the bowl as well. Even after, let's say, her husband dies or after the divorce, she's also to the bowl. But again, the Gemara said, Ma'ir Yabola, then you don't have to talk about relations. Below Baala Nami, Mishosh and Nistra Imon Nesra al Baal Vial Boel. From the moment that she has seclusion with him, there's a prohibition to the husband and to the Boel, Liola Machatishta, until she drinks. That prohibition is going to be in effect. So again, she doesn't even have to have relations with her husband, even if the husband just gave her a get, or even if he just didn't give her to drink from the waters, that would be enough to prohibit her to the Boel. And so the Gemara instead tries as follows, Elasota Laboel, rather the case is the Sota had relations of an Yisur Kal with the adulterer, as Rashi over here says, Elasota Shenivala Laboel Nesar Balaha Usrolav. The husband is the one that created the prohibition to the Boel, because obviously the woman is not allowed to have relations with anyone else when she's a married woman. And so then if she violates that and she's with the Boel, then she becomes usher to the Baal. And so the Gemara says, but that doesn't make sense. Ha Yisur Kalu, that's not a lenient Isser, that's called a lenient Isser. Isser Chamru, that's a very strict Isser, Dahainu Eishes Ish, because that's Mahamish a case of Eishes Ish. She's a married woman and she's having relations with another man. Rashi over here says, V'hai mi have bal Isser Kal, Isser Chamru, Dahainu Eishes Ish. You're going to call that an Isser Kal? That's an Isser Chamru, that's an Isser of Eishes Ish. And we'll continue with this discussion in the next video on Daf Tzadi Hey Amud Beis.